Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Samson. With Samson, there's always that one little nagging feeling in the back of my mind that something just doesn't feel right. In most cases, that's just because he has a very high shot speed, which makes aiming much more difficult for me. And part of that is just because I'm used to the default shot speed that other characters have. So I know how to aim in order to hit the enemies if they're moving, I know the patterns of the enemies. Of course, with some erratic ones that move randomly, like spiders, you can never really predict where they're gonna be. But when your shot speed is low, or maybe when you're more used to the shot speed you're kinda dealing with, then you start seeing where the enemies might go, and then you can actually hit them appropriately. And when you start playing a Samson, or when I start playing a Samson, then that gets thrown out of the window, because everything that you've learned so far is kind of nullified by the fact that his stairs travel faster. And of course that's just the maybe subjective aspect of it, something that we're not used to just feels different. But there's also the objective aspect of it, because he does shoot faster, meaning his stairs pass through enemies at a much higher speed. It also means that there's actually less chance for you to hit them. While it doesn't seem very intuitive, I would say, just think of it like this. If you shoot a ther that moves very slowly through the room and you have enemies which move around, there's actually much more chance that the thers that go slowly will hit the enemies eventually. I'm not saying that you're gonna hit them direct hit on, but the fact that the thers are moving slower gives you more leeway in order to actually damage the enemies that you're shooting. And I think that's also the objective aspect that make Samson just one of those characters that are kinda not annoying to play, but it requires you to really know how the game works in order to take full advantage of him. It's also funny because I feel when you get into later floors, it's not that bad, and I think that's probably just because through the course of the game you do get some natural shot speed ups, which means that you're more dealt, or maybe you're more used to fighting the enemies in later stages with higher shot speed than early on. And of course, when you start the game with a character that just has a high shot speed, then things get a bit different, just because you are not used to fighting the enemies on the earlier floors with someone who shoots as fast as Samson does. And I think that's a big thing in Isaac. It's not just knowing what the enemies do and how they attack. In order to really maximize how well you clear the rooms and how fast you are, you also need to know maybe the limits of the character you're playing as. And I'm not just saying that in the fact, like I did before, in the fact that Maggie has 4 health, which means you should sacrifice a lot of that health, or maybe you shouldn't be afraid of taking damage, but more in the fact that there are all these different stats which affect the enemies in different ways. So shooting fast, maybe dealing a lot of damage, having high shot speed, all affect the enemies differently, and some of them can usually, well, obviously all these stats are somewhat positive, they do bring an objective difference. But if you enter a room and you have a lot of damage, you might end up shooting an enemy, the enemy then explodes and then it can damage you. And of course, if you have just a higher shot speed, or maybe a higher tier speed, you might not kill that enemy in one shot, but in 2 shots, and after you hit them once, then maybe your brain starts processing that this enemy is someone that will explode and you have to get out of the way. And of course, if you just have high damage, you really don't have the time to react accordingly and then of course get away from it. And I think that a lot of that does come, of course, from playing and experience, but a lot of that also comes from just realizing what kind of run you're dealing with. And in this case, of course, we're dealing with a very weak run, actually, just because this daily wasn't as strong as it could have been. We did get Holy Mantle, and I think that was a mistake picking it up, just because earlier on the floor, so the first Devil Deal gave us the Abaddon and the Spirit of the Night, which are both premium items, but sadly, the only damage or any DPS up, so no tears up, no damage ups, besides Abaddon has shown up in this run, which means that we're kind of starved for basically anything that would help us win the run. And when I saw Holy Mantle, I picked it up without thinking that maybe it's not the best item for us. And of course, you could be arguing here with me, why wouldn't you pick the Holy Mantle? It's probably one of the best items in the game, at least defensive-wise, just because it does protect you from a lot of damage. And with Holy Mantle, you can go through the whole run without actually worrying about your damage penalty at all. And that's very true, and I think in the end, if you know that you're gonna have a strong round, and most runs do end up being strong in Isaac just because of how the game works, then Holy Mantle is a good pickup. But at that point in time, we are playing a daily run, which means that we have to consider other factors as well. So we have to be fast enough in order to get to boss rush and then do hush, while still trying to explore as many rooms as possible. Will Holy Mantle help us do that? Not really, because if we enter a room that is just too difficult for us to deal with, and if we take damage once, then most likely we can take damage again. I'm not saying that Holy Metal won't protect us, obviously, but I'm just saying that Holy Metal won't give us as much help as we maybe needed in order to be really successful on a run. And part of that is just because it doesn't give you any benefits in order of room clearing, it doesn't give you any mapping, it basically gives you no speed at which you can actually kill the enemies with. And I think that's what we needed most in that situation. We did have 3 bombs and 7 cents, and I think there was a good chance there of us actually getting a good item. But then when you think about it, maybe of course we would really be happy with a super powerful broken item, something like Tech X. But obviously the chances of getting something like that are very low. Most likely maybe we would get a damage up, maybe a stats up, maybe a tears up. Would that help us enough in order to kind of nullify the Holy Mantle? And maybe that's an argument for another day, but I think on average it's not a bad idea to reroll there, because there are possibilities of getting some items which will genuinely increase your DPS and then of course your run as well. But Holy Metal obviously is not a bad pickup. Nobody who's picked it up, I wouldn't consider it a mistake. I'm just saying that maybe a better play is to try to reroll it into something better, and maybe some people did and just had a blast of a run, and maybe some didn't, and we're stuck in this sad holy hell. Well, what happened here was a very interesting proposition. So because I had a lot of time, because obviously I didn't do boss rush, and even on the last floor I just didn't feel like exploring one of the big rooms, just because I feel like my damage just wasn't strong enough. And obviously not just my damage, my tear speed, everything was just so pathetic that it just didn't feel right to actually go and explore through things, because I felt so weak. So what I did there was I entered the boss trap room first in hopes maybe it would contain something good. And because it had 4 golden chests, usually one of those golden chests, or maybe there's a good or a high chance that one of those golden chests actually contains some chest items. And those chest items can contain something like damage ups. The Cricket's head is a great one, Steven, things like that. And not just even some familiars would help us. Basically, any item at this point I would be happy with, and that would help us. Sadly, we didn't really get anything too significant out of the items-wise, but we did get the card which spawned a beggar, and we gave the beggar a few cents, and he spawned restock, and I picked it up, hoping maybe I could stock up on Spirit Hearts or maybe on cards on the Hush fight, get a lot of consumables that way, and when I actually picked up Restock, it gives you a few random consumables, and it gave us the Joker card, and I didn't even, for some reason, I should have finished the boss trap room. I was just so excited to see that I had a chance at the Devil Deal. I just used it immediately, and I went out and I saw Brimstone, which was a very lucky coincidence, because if I took the normal route and actually went to the boss, and the boss would actually give me a Devil Deal, that Devil Deal would then not contain Brimstone, it would probably contain something else. And for that reason, the fact that I used it at the time I used it so immediately when I got it, which was part due to excitement and part due to me just feeling weak, like I should just get out of there and hopefully get something good so I can then finish the run at a much better pace. I just popped it, and thankfully the lucky play paid off. And of course, whenever something lucky like this happens, I can't not help but feel just a bit bad, because I imagine not a lot of people did it. The optimal play there would be definitely to save it and see if you don't get a Devil Deal and then use it. And that's just because, basically, if you use the Joker card first and then get the Devil Deal, you kind of wasted your Joker card, because you could have used it on the next floor, or maybe on a floor where you wouldn't naturally get a Devil Deal. So maybe even if you use it on Shoal or maybe the Dark Room, that would still be a more optimal use of that card, just because we do get a few extra items that we otherwise wouldn't have gotten. But of course, if you know that there's Brimstone inside, you can use it immediately and just be super powerful, or maybe just, in my case, just be super lucky because you're too anxious to wait, and it turns out well. And I'm glad that obviously sometimes we all need a little bit of luck in order to get us through things, but I think even without Brimstone, I would still be able to finish this run. There's no doubt that I would take more damage on the Hush fight, just because fighting the Hush with just your base tears without penetrations and things like that can be a big pain in the ass, especially when he starts spawning enemies. There's just too many of them for you to deal with. So that was kind of a bummer, in the sense that that we just didn't have the tools necessary in order to really fight the Hush fight. But like I said, thankfully, because we did get Brimstone, we didn't really have to worry about that, and thankfully our Holy Grail Mary play worked out as expected, and that we did get a really, really powerful item. It synergizes also very well with Lump of Coal, and Lump of Coal is just one of my favorite items. I think I mentioned this a lot, but I'll mention it again, because it does give you and produce just a lot of really fancy synergies. And I just like the fact that it changes the way you play, because you have to be farther away from enemies in order to maximize the effectiveness of Lump of Coal. And the great thing is that the effectiveness or the damage you get the farther away you are from the enemies actually is quite significant and quite substantial. So it's not a random, it's not insignificant like a lot of items in Isengard, but the damage can actually be the double of the damage you usually deal, and I think that's worth it for you to kind of change your playstyle. Thankfully, with that said, we did finish the round, we did beat the Lamb. Obviously that wasn't too difficult because we did have that nice synergy between Lump of Coal and Brimstone, and we finished 28, which is yet another very good score. And of course remember, whenever you see me finish in 28, there's always about 20 cheaters before me, which means that if you kind of discount those, I'm in the top 10, at least at the moment. I've played this daily. I don't doubt that at the end of the day I will be moved down the ranks. As more people play, obviously, people will get a higher score, or some people will get a higher score eventually than me, and then I'll be pushed down. But at the time of playing, I'm 28, which is just excellent. Obviously, I did miss boss rush by just a few seconds. It wasn't too significant because the daily was hard, meaning that a lot of people missed boss rush. But overall, it was a very, very tedious daily that turned well. I really enjoyed playing it because it never felt like I was facing those very annoying rooms that you sometimes face whenever you're weak. So those rooms that have a lot of enemies which spawn other enemies, which then maybe split into more enemies, those are just the most annoying. And thankfully there was none of that in this daily. It was just a fun daily throughout, not too difficult. It was a bit annoying with low damage, but thankfully the Brimstone has managed to save the day once again. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.